It's Queering Dreams with
Crystal Mason and
Jason Wyman. We are back. A little visual description. I am a white, male perceived, anti-binary queer with long brown hair and a long brown bushy beard. My hair is tied back with a bandana today. I'm wearing a fabulous t-shirt that says support your local poets on it that I got at a poetry reading Voz in Tinta here in San Francisco. And I am set against a backdrop of my bookshelves and record cases and a closed window.
Mm-hmm. Okay, again, I'm Crystal, and I'm going to also do a little visual description here. I am a Black gender queer person. I have on black glasses. My hair is curly with a bit of gray. I am wearing a plaid shirt with blue and gold in it, and sort of brownish gold. Set against a backdrop, mostly white wall with a bit of a pig in the background and a bookshelf. I also have a nose piercing, a lip piercing, and 2 silver earrings. All my jewelry is silver. That's my jam. And I think that's it.
And you're looking fabulous today.
Well, thank you. And so are you, my dear.
Well, let me pull up our screen and do our agenda again. I just want to give a quick shout out to my dear friend and comrade, Aiden, for inspiring us to do it this way. It's so helpful.
Mm-hmm. And helpful to us as well, I have to say.
Yes. Keeps us on track, and you can follow along too.
Right.
So you can find us on YouTube at Queering Dreams. All of our episodes and future media content will be on YouTube.
Our Facebook page is Queering Dreams, and you'll find resources, links, short videos, memes, and more.
And we also have an Instagram account, Queering Dreams, memes, and short snippets. Please make sure to tune in to all of our social media and follow us and like us on your platform.
How are you doing this week, Jason?
I'm good. You know, last week I shared a little bit about feeling like my cup is ever expanding. And, I am amazed at how it can grow even more. And that is a beautiful thing. And I think is, we've been talking a lot about the power of co-creation and like the power of naming our dreams and being explicit about them. But, now that we're in like week 6 of doing this, I am excited and slightly by the expansiveness of our dreams and actually seeing them come into reality. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. There's a few people in my circle of folks that are dealing with some illnesses and surprises and things of this sort. And it just helps me remember that we have to be ready sometimes, and also ready to call on our community when we're in spots of trouble, and that we don't have to do everything alone. I'm excited about what we're doing, and like every day I see in my everyday life the value of our work. And the value of dreaming, and the value of being in and part of community.
I know we're going to be talking today about cultivating conversation and a specific tool that we've kind of developed for that, and I just want to say the dreaming that we've been doing together and the way that we've been using it has made it so that I can even be more present, I think, to a lot of the pain and, hurt that a lot of my community also has, been facing, and, seeing there's just been a lot of crap going on, especially along our borders yet again, both the borders north and south of us, but also our borders internally within our United States, because we have territories in our United States
Yes.
for independent sovereign nations. And just knowing all of the ways in which those borders and boundaries are violently being crossed and enforced. Having lots of conversations lately about that. It's been, dreaming has allowed me not to lose sight of ultimately what we're working towards, which is, liberation from capitalism and white supremacy.
Thank you. That was lovely and quite well said.
Topic of the week. We are going to be talking about conversation and our new tool. You came up with a great title for our new tool. What is it, Crystal?
It's called a querying circle.
You love plays on words just as much as me.
Yeah. But it's actually quite perfect, because I find like the word query fits a little bit better than maybe just a questioning circle, because again, like something we talked about the other day, for me, I find like to query is more to search for understanding, to search for knowledge, rather than like looking to have some thoughts or beliefs reinforced, right? So to me, it just sounds like a more open process, and where you're sort of open to surprises. Yeah, so like I said, I think that's like, it fits what we're doing in with the applied dreaming and the dreaming together. I feel like it just fits a little better than the word question.
Lovely. So we're going to talk a little bit about our origin stories around talking story. Specifically, the value we're going to examine today is conversation, and kind of at the core of conversation is both talking story and doing some inquiry. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We are also going to be talking about a little bit of client development. We're actually going to use our querying circle. We're going to do a little bit deeper dive into it and share a little more. We are going to be doing some guiding values, conversation is value, having a deeper conversation about that. And then really client work. We're going to use and practice our querying circle to look at two different clients that we've been working with. One client is Dandelion Arts Finance Training Program, and the other one is the Virginia Fine Art Museum, right, Crystal?
The museum, Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, yeah.
Great. So we're going to do a little practice session for all of you to see how we use it. At the very end of all of that, we're going to do a quick wrap up and a little bit of closing. So shall we dive into our origin stories about the tradition of talking story? And I'm going to stop the share here.
Yeah. I'll start. And I would just say for myself, story has always played a big part in my life. From reading stories, which I feel like from a young age, it like really saved my life, because it let me know that there was other worlds possible, and than the moment I was living in, which was a lifesaver, really. And I also have always just loved to be told stories. I lived in a mostly Black neighborhood growing up. When we first moved into the neighborhood, like there were white people living there, then they were all gone, except for a white lady who lived next door to us. Her name was Miss Watson. And she stayed in the neighborhood until she died, which was many, many, many years later than when we first met. And one of my biggest joys actually was going to her house and sitting with her and her just telling me stories. And I enjoyed that so much. Um, and so for me, sort of growing up and coming into the world, um, sharing stories about myself was like a good sign that I wanted you to know me and that I wanted to know you. And it's always been a sort of way for me to sort of to be vulnerable with other people. And that was to share stories. Um, then later in my life, doing social work, and working in programs with more marginalized people, I just really realized that everybody really just wanted to be heard. They wanted to tell their story. They wanted to be seen, which for me again was sort of like a, a plea for a place to be vulnerable. Um, and um, and so I've always seen story as important, but also not just like, oh, I'm going to tell you this and you tell me that. It was also, like I said, I see it as an invitation to be vulnerable, and to let someone else be vulnerable with you. And I feel like that in itself is a great community building tool. Because I feel like we don't have a lot of spaces where we can be vulnerable with each other. And once again, I've seen things sort of fall apart because we haven't created that space. So people come in with their armor, um, and with their sort of weapons, and with no place to take their armor off or to lay their weapons down. And to me, good conversation um, provides that space.
Thank you for talking story and sharing your story here, you know, and doing the thing that we're talking about, you know. Story has always been kind of central in my life too. You know, I wrote stories when I was a kid. I loved going to the movies. I did poetry. I did speech in high school, and the category of speech that I did was storytelling and the oral tradition of storytelling. I went to school for storytelling. Granted, I went to school for rhetoric, got kicked out, went back to school for storytelling, hated university, left university, ended up working in out of school time and worked with an organization called Street Side Stories here in San Francisco, and then joined their board because Street Side Stories was about creating space for young folks, middle school students specifically, to tell their stories, however it is that they wanted to tell their stories. And I've always believed in the power of our own stories to be able to reshape and shape our worlds. I think I've started really understanding, like I've known that. I think it's easy to kind of superficially understand the power of voice because it is something that is so necessary. And I think the thing that I'm becoming to understand as I'm getting older, as I'm going through processes of trying to break patterns of thought and break my own narratives or disrupt the colonization of my own mind and the ways in which white supremacist thought and behavior seeps into my own narrative, I'm beginning to understand and unpack a little bit more, not just the stories we tell, but how the stories we tell maybe enforce and reinforce meta narratives that might actually be might be moving us towards a destination that we are unaware that we are moving towards because we've localized that story into our own personal experience. And we haven't taken a moment to reflect on how our personal experience connects to the meta narratives that we are literally constantly being force-fed through family traditions, through religion, through mass media and culture, through journalism and news, through policy. Policy is storytelling. I don't think we think of it that way, but policy itself is storytelling, and we buy into narratives that can be really not serving our own selves, whether that be an individual self or a collective self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And that's part of the reason why I've been talking for a while about actually doing a dreaming workshop called Locating Your Dreams. Because, you know, exactly because of all that you just said. And I've also talked about this before in some of these little talks of ours, that, you know, we're constantly being fed, right? We're constantly being fed stories and scenarios and beliefs, and we rarely have time to interrogate those stories and, you know, scenarios and beliefs. And you're right. And especially as an African American living in the United States, like most of my life, again, one of the things that has saved my life and possibly saved at least some of my sanity is the interrogation of what it means to be a fat Black woman living in the United States, and to sort of tear apart some of the stories I've been told and accepted without giving it much thought, and locating where those stories come from. And again, like sort of interrogating those stories so that I could actually see myself as not just okay, but wonderful. And that it's been a journey. And it also sometimes it also causes cognitive dissonance in me, to believe myself wonderful when almost all the stories I've been told has been just the opposite. So again, about the importance of story. As you say, it's also important to interrogate our stories and to have safe spaces, well, safe enough spaces to do that.
Stories, which flows very well into our core value. And I'm going to bring up our document. We're actually going to bring up a second document. We are going to be talking today about conversation and a querying circle. So, you know, as Crystal was just talking about, you know, we want to also kind of interrogate or question, or as we say, query the stories that we're actually, you know, telling ourselves and the world. And sometimes it's easier to do that with others. So we're going to share a little way that we have kind of constructed that, and that is our querying circle tool. But before we dive into the querying circle tool, let's jump into our guiding value of conversation. And this comes from a client meeting that we had this week. Woo-hoo! Oh my gosh, with Dandelion Arts Finance Training Program. More on that will be coming soon, but we want to just hop in a little bit to our conversation and our value of conversation. So there is our value. Do you want to read it out loud, Crystal?
Yes, we value conversation. We believe conversation is how we cultivate trust, camaraderie, and solidarity. Plus, conversation is a part of a deep and long-standing traditions.
What I'm realizing is when I shared this, I did not include the practices that we had identified in our one-on-one. So bear with me as you see behind the scenes real quick. Here we are, look at that. Oh, how nice everything is organized. So we practice this by
we practice this by talking story,
listening to understand, learn, and be changed,
asking open-ended questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that,
and being generous with open-hearted curiosity. why is this such a value for us? I know we've talked about why talking story, which is the first point on here, is so important to us, but why is conversation, beyond just talking story, why is conversation so important?
I think a lot of it for me is like lies right in here. You know, the bullet points here. And because I feel like, one, we want to learn about the people we're in community with. And we want those people to learn something about us. Because again, going back, you know, we feel like these things like help us create trust, right? And as I said, help us create spaces where we can actually be vulnerable with each other. Because it's hard to be vulnerable with people you don't trust. And, you know, so, I mean, there's that, for instance. But also, you know, I think back on the other page, there was a little bullet point where it says, you know, we can't give anybody a voice, right? And I think that also is about why conversation is so important, because we are not here to give voice to people. We're here to help create the space where people can use their voice to tell their stories. And for me also, it kind of goes back to the issue of expertise, right? And because I feel like we're all experts on our own lives, right? And, you know, and yes, data is important, but we all are experts when it comes to ourselves and our experiences in this world. And so it also, for me, it helps get rid of a lot of assumptions and to see people and to be seen. And when we're talking about dreaming together in community, we're talking about building community, I think that's all very important. And because it's like coming from a caring space, rather than this space of what we're going to do for someone else. And I was talking to someone in one of our one-on-ones, and the question of being in service came up. And so this is also a way that we can be of service to each other. And so, yeah, that's important to me.
You know, one of the things I think for me is I know when we were writing this, for me, I was really like, is it dialogue? Is it conversation? Like, what is the word that we put in there when we say what we value in relation to this kind of exchange and mutuality that we're actually trying to cultivate and know and be, like, not just, you know, in some, as you mentioned, expert way, because I feel like once we place the label of expert on something is the moment that we've created a non-expert or an other or someone that needs to be, the information needs to be dumped into them, versus the fact that we are, you know, all here mutually together trying to figure this thing out, including me being a member of that conversation. And so for me, you know, the word conversation, the word dialogue for me is a little too loaded. I think of theater. I also think of the dialectic, and I think of dialectical Marxism, and then I like want to run away. Because while I might want to abolish white supremacy and capitalism, I also get fearful of Marxist spaces. It's my own bias. I'm going to be honest about that. It's my own bias. I listen to a lot of Marxist podcasts, so don't get me wrong. It's not accessible to me. And so conversation feels more accessible. It feels more mutual. It feels more like there is a seeking to understand. And what happened for me is, as we were writing this, you and I started, you know, articulating how we practice it. And we had words on here, like active listening was one of the words that we originally had on here as one of our bullets. And instead we changed that to listening to understand, learn, and be changed. And to me, that also speaks better to this idea of mutuality. I'm not here to change you. I'm here to be changed by you and in turn better understand who you be. Uh, that's conversation to me. And that's where the mutuality comes in, because that can't happen if I'm not present. Like literally, if I'm just sitting here as a facilitator, I'm actually not necessarily present in a conversation. I'm there as a facilitator. And there might be roles where a facilitator is necessary, and I'm not going to deny facilitation is a necessary skill. But even in the co-creative process with you, Crystal, I think, as we work with clients, we're naturally dipping in and out and sharing the role of facilitator and then the role of storyteller, so that we can both naturally come back and forth into this space in a more mutual way.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about asking open-ended questions, because you actually had some very eloquent words about that and what asking open-ended questions can mean. Would you mind talking a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think often when we read asking open-ended questions, our conditioning tells us, whether that be education in a variety of forms, that open-ended questions are who, what, where, when, why, and how. And that it should be spacious and, blah, blah, blah. I think any question can be open-ended, including a closed-ended question, or what are traditionally considered closed-ended questions, which are yes, no questions. What I mean by asking open-ended questions is, does the question provide an opening for further learning and discovery? That's what I mean by an open-ended question. So sometimes a yes or no question is actually open-ended, because getting a reaction yes or no opens up a new way of thinking or a new opportunity for you in a way that an quote unquote traditionally worded open-ended who, what, why, when, where, and how might actually be too broad of a question for you to actually see it as open-ended, because when you get that big question, it might actually cut off all possibility from your view.
And then basically sometimes can actually stop the flow of conversation, right?
Yep.
And actually sort of like create a sort of internal conversation rather than one that is shared, right? And so, yeah, thank you for that. And thank you also for like saying that, because as it does in conversation, it gave me a new awareness and a new way to think about asking open-ended questions.
And I want you to speak a little bit about this being generous with open-hearted curiosity. I know that was not originally on our bullets when we were together. And then as we were talking, you were mentioning this idea of just being curious and then with an open heart. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for me, when I think about that, it simply is about, yeah, again, I come back to that word of being vulnerable, about being generous, which means to not assume things, and especially not to assume the worst, but to be curious, which then like furthers hopefully understanding. Because again, for me, we go into conversation to learn, to share, uh, to understand. And I feel like none of that happens if you come in with a lot of assumptions and without curiosity. Um, and so, again, like I said, I just feel like these are important components so that we can get to that place of listening to understand, learn, and to be changed. So yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking about those things.
Agreed. Great. Let's take a look at our agenda. Ooh, we talked about our guiding values, and we're now going to do our topic dive and a little bit more. Specifically, we're going to be talking about two different clients that we have for two different, very different kinds of projects. And we're going to be using our querying circle tool, which we actually used yesterday with one of our clients, which is awesome. And so we're going to give a little overview of the tool right now. And then we're actually going to do this process for you live twice. Once with Crystal, talking about the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, and once with me talking about Dandelion. Actually, we're both in conversation with each other. It's just a matter of who's going to start the conversation. So I want to do a brief overview of the tool first, kind of where it came from and how it was developed, and then we'll dive into the process. So this tool has two different routes to it. Crystal, I know you've been using kind of informal questioning circle or querying circle within your dreaming practice already in your dreaming sessions. What have you been doing? How has questions showed up in your dream practice?
I do like a couple of different types of dreaming depending on the size of the group and the time. And then there is a dreaming practice that I do with a couple of good friends of mine. And so it's three of us. And basically, we started out by seeing, asking the basic question, how are you? How are you today? How are you feeling, right now? And so again, we sort of started out with some questions and querying. We usually then go into a dream space. And then after that dream space, each of us take a bit of time to sort of talk about what came up for us in our dreaming, what sort of visions we've had, and to talk about how it may be applying to what's going on in our lives. And then we all three of us, we basically take turns like querying one another about what was just said. And again, we all take turns sort of taking us into the dream space. We all take turns sort of setting up the meetings. And we all are like facilitators basically in this space. And then, with a larger group, when we don't necessarily do a querying circle, but we all answer the same questions. So I answer the same questions that I ask of the other people that I'm dreaming with. And while I may be the one who usually takes us into the dreaming space, I'm a participant. So I also talk about what came up for me. I'm also asked questions, and I ask questions, and I sort of then provide like some specific questions that we could ask. But very simply, there is a space where we get to talk about what we're thinking about. There is a space where we're seeding our dreams. There is a space where we go into dream space. And then there is a space where we get to query one another. Well, we get to talk about the dreams that came up for us. And then there's a space where we query one another to try to understand ourselves and each other.
Thank you. I love hearing about, your way of doing this, specifically through the dreaming process and all of the different dreaming practices that you've been cultivating over the last, 5-6 years.
Mm-hmm.
For me, this came about actually through something called a question circle to start with, through a project I did with Sally Tamayo-Lee and Mary Clara Mobley called Sticky Questions, which we did for the Asian Art Museum here in San Francisco. sticky questions ended up being this double-sided 36-foot sticker mural that
It was
asked
beautiful.
crucial questions of the community by the community and of passersby, and invited them to answer those crucial questions on highly reflective and holographic and translucent square stickers with black Sharpies. And over a process of about 3 months, both sides of the mural got covered with over 3,000 responses to questions like, how do you heal when someone harms you? Or if the ocean was listening, what would you say to it? We ended up designing the question circle, I think, in large part because of the issue you just mentioned, Crystal, which was the institution, the Asian Art Museum, asked me initially, I just take in my visage, the Asian Art Museum asked me initially to do a project, a public art project with their high school internship program. And my first response to them was, you're asking a white male perceived artist to do a public art installation on behalf of the Asian Art Museum. Why me?
What's wrong with this picture?
And I want to be honest, they had a good response for me, to be, I think, the issue again was, can we ask the hard question? Can I hold space to listen to the response? And can I even hold my own responsibility in this space as an accomplice? Because what I heard from them was, you've already been contracted with us 3 times before working with our interns. Each time we've contracted you, you've brought in someone that better reflects the museum to work with you. We know you have a city vendor number. You need to have a city vendor number in order to do the public artwork. And I was like, okay, that's actually those were like actual good responses. And so my next question was, my next response was, well, then I can't do anything until we bring on the team that is actually going to solve the question or be able to answer the question that you're asking, which the question that they were asking at the time was, how can the teen interns be better neighbors to folks in the Tenderloin and Soma? That was like the major question that they were asking. And so that's why we brought on Sally Tamayo-Lee and Mary Clara Mobley, because both of them, Mary Clara Mobley emigrated here from the Philippines, grew up in the Tenderloin, and Sally Tamayo, her family emigrated here. She was born here. And Sally Tamayo-Lee is Chinese and Filipino American, grew up in San Francisco, but not in the Tenderloin. And for us, if we were to do this project, we needed a way for the community to be included in the facilitation of the actual art. And so questions we realized the first thing we did with the Asian Art Museum was ask a question. And questions ended up becoming everything that we asked in order to get to a 36-foot sticker mural. That was not the proposal that we put forward to the museum, was a sticker mural. We actually did not put forward anything to the museum. We said, we're going to put together a team and we're going to ask questions. And through the process of asking questions, we're going to get to a mural. And we did. And the community had ownership over it because the questions on the mural were asked directly from the community.
Yeah, I remember that. It was such a wonderful experience to actually be there, to like read and answer questions. And it was also aesthetically pleasing.
It really was. And seriously, that came from a question of, as we're talking about question circles, it was just like, we came up with a formalized workshop and process that we did to ask questions, but really just the root of it was like, how do we continually just ask questions? Because there was a mural already up on the installation. And so we realized that we didn't want to deinstall someone else's work, even though it was a temporary work. as artists during the time that it was 2017, we didn't want to literally whitewash someone else's work or flip someone's work around and paint on the other side, because that was actually, as we questioned what we were doing as artists, literally across from City Hall during some height of gentrification in 2017, while wildfires are raging everywhere in California. That's how we ended up putting plastic over it, because we were like, we want the community to cover up the mural that's existing so that it shows the collective power of the community when it comes together. So, and that's actually what it did, but that was not, like, it was literally not, we had no idea when we started that.
And just one last thing I want to say about that. That is like literally the essence of not giving people a voice, but literally making space for people to share their voice with others, right?
I love how this all comes full circle, Crystal. So we are going to dive in really quickly into our querying circle. So I think one of the things that Crystal and you and I have really talked about is, how do we formalize some of the things that we're doing, or standardize some of the things? Not so much because we believe totally and completely in standardization, but standardization allows some repetition, which allows iteration. And I think that that is really what we're looking at, is how do we continue to build and how do we continue to iterate what we're doing so that what we're doing actually can be applied to different contexts. And so this gives us that opportunity. Yes, we are going to take one moment and we're going to stop and we're going to pause recording. Be right back, but you'll not see that. And we're back. Hi, everyone. It's like we didn't even read. So we shared a little bit about the origins of this. And so we're going to go into the actual tool, and then we're going to practice the tool. So Crystal, do you want me to just do a quick overview of this, and then we can dive in and you can go first?
Yeah.
So the process is pretty simple. You're going to pick a speaker and you're going to pick a listener. For this particular iteration, we're only doing it with two people. The listener could be a group of people like it was yesterday during our client meeting. So just to kind of name that, but you pick a speaker and a listener. The speaker speaks for up to 5 minutes. They don't need to speak for all of 5 minutes, but they have up to 5 minutes to share about the project or the client. And they should really touch on the relationships, guiding dreams, values, practices, and any kind of known actions or deadlines that we want. The full 5 minutes should be given, even if the speaker doesn't have much to share. Again, if you need to end early, you need to end early. The listener should be listening intently and jots down questions or comments as they arise on a separate sheet of paper. After the speaker concludes their final thought, the listener has, again, about up to 2 minutes. It's normally like 30 seconds. It's not 2 minutes. I just like being generous with time because we often are shortchanged with time, to select up to about 3 questions that they would like to ask the speaker. Once the listener asks each question to the speaker has 2 minutes to respond. Again, up to 2 minutes. Here we want a little bit of a shorter turnaround time on the response because we want to actually get a little bit more to conversation. So this feels very stilted because it is meant to be a little stilted at the very beginning so that we can get to a richer conversation later. After the speaker's response for 2 minutes, they actually are given an opportunity to jot down questions that they might want to ask the listener. And then they are given the opportunity to ask those questions of the listener. And then the listener is given an opportunity to respond to those questions. Then and only then do you actually open up for a little bit bigger of a conversation with specific questions about what else needs to be discussed, what decisions need to be made, and what are our immediate actions and who is taking them. at the very end, you want to thank the person. So that is a little bit about the tool itself. Crystal, before I stop the share, is there anything you would like to add about the tool?
No, I think you wrapped that up pretty clearly.
Great. So we're not going to be looking at the tool because we know the tool, and we are going to practice this tool with all of you. We're going to focus it on 2 different clients. Crystal's going to go first and talk about one client, and then I am going to go second and talk about a different client. Each client is very nuanced. I'm going to set the timer right now. Crystal, timer on my phone for 5 minutes.
All right.
Set timer for 5 minutes.
Now.
Starting now.
Okay. First of all, this will be my second time working with this particular group. And as Jason said, this is a program that is part of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And the name of the program is called MLIT, which is Museum Leaders in Training. And the people taking part in this program are students in high school or middle school, because they can be anywhere from the 8th grade to the 12th grade. It is a 6-month program, and they get to learn about how a museum is run, anywhere from like how the museum store is run to the curation and planning programming. They also get to participate in planning programming as well. Last year when I did this workshop, one of the interns actually helped plan an exhibit called The Dirty South, which was a great exhibit that talked about the contributions Black people, specifically from the South, have made to art and art forms. I was lucky enough to see that exhibit, and it was actually like so like heart-filling. I can't even tell you. And so basically what I've been invited to do is to come in and talk with the students and to help them dream about possibilities. And some of the things we talk about, and we'll talk about this time around as well, is what a museum is for. Who is it for? There's certain points where in seeding the dreams, I asked the students to close their eyes for about 2 minutes and to try to remember the last time they were in the Virginia Museum or any museum. I asked them to try to visualize and remember who they saw. And I asked them to try to visualize and remember who they didn't see. And to think of ways that might be changed if that's something they're interested in changing. And basically what I'm trying to do is help them as interns imagine who they could be in this process and how they may make their own dreams come true in the process of being interns at this museum. The project is led by Fanula Bradley, who I met through Jason. So I'm getting a second chance through Fanula to work with these young folks again. I find it really fulfilling for me because one thing is that I actually grew up in Richmond, Virginia. And when I was their age, I honestly didn't even know this museum existed. It wasn't until I was in university that I discovered the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. and started to spend a lot of time there and actually feel like just like very at home there. I love their like modernist exhibit and their their Art Deco exhibits. And honestly, you know, I wasn't never really that interested in their sort of old white guy art that they had, which they almost all, you know, they had a lot of. But I have been interested over the years because literally I've lived in San Francisco for most of my life. I spent 10 years living in Berlin. And every time I came back to Richmond for a visit, I made it a point to go back to the museum. And I have actually seen a lot of changes in the museum over the years in their like permanent exhibits, and also like the sort of I forget what that's called, but the exhibits that come and go basically. And I also know that they are actually have done some good work around actually in inclusivity and trying to hire more people of color. And so I see the Virginia Museum going in a direction that I appreciate. And I feel just, like I said, just very honored that I might be able to play some small part in talking with young leaders who might be, you know, one day also shaping the direction of the Virginia Museum or other museums. And my hope is to try to help these youth leaders to expand their visions, not only of what the museum could be, but who they could be inside a museum.
Great. I'm going to take a second to craft my questions because they came to me as I was listening to you. Just one moment. All right, I have 3 questions for you.
Go ahead.
My first question is, what's drawn you home? What's drawn you home? Knowing that you've gone back to Richmond. My second question is, what isn't a museum? And then my third question is, I'm practicing one of these open-ended questions that is a yes/no question. Is the preposition inside in the phrase, inside who they are inside the museum, the right preposition?
Okay. So first I'm going to answer the question, what isn't a museum? And one of the things I think a museum isn't is a place for everyone. Though most museums would say that they are, I don't see that in the museums that I've been in. And I've been in a lot of museums. I mean, I lived in Washington, D.C. for a long time where the museums were actually free. So, you know, instead of going to classes, I usually went to the museum instead, museums instead. And often I didn't necessarily feel at home or welcomed, but I was still drawn. And in Europe, it was a bit the same. And when I first started going to the Virginia Museum, it was the same. I didn't usually see a lot of people like myself. And when I say like myself, I mean Black, fat, queer, poor. So yeah, so a museum isn't a place for everyone. So I'm going to go for the third question next. So who they are inside the museum, is that the right preposition? I think it actually is, because one of the reasons I think that's the right question, because I hope that they will also, part of dreaming, the dreaming exercise is also talking about like sort of who they want to be in the world. And so then the question for me is, can they bring that inside the museum? And it may or may not be welcome, depending on what their dream is of being out in the world. But as someone who has worked within like arts organizations, it's long been one of my dreams to be able to bring my whole self into the museum, which means bringing my own concerns, my own wishes, hopes, and dreams. So I think that might be the right question. But I definitely want to think about that some and to see if I can expand upon that as well. So what has brought me home to Richmond? Well, a few things. One is a wish to have a little bit more space to be creative in several different ways, not only just artistically, but also in what we're doing with Queering Dreams. Part of the reason I've come home as well is to try to figure out for myself what this place means to me and what I mean to this place. As some of you may know, Richmond has a long, dark history as a specific space and place for slavery. It was the capital of the Confederacy, for instance. In Virginia was one of the first landings, I think in 1619, of the first slaves coming to America. And reading the Nicole Hannah-Jones's 1619 project actually brought up a lot of things for me and sort of stirred up this wish that I had to explore my relationship to this place. And not only to my immediate family, but also to my possible imagined and reimagined ancestors. But also it was a wish and a hope to sort of rediscover and in some ways recover some familiar relationships and friendships, and this feeling of a possible home space.
What question might you have of me?
Let me see. I'd like to ask to see if you think asking the interns who they want to be inside the museum is a good proposition.
I think the way you framed it was different. The second time you mentioned it was different than the way you framed it the first time.
Okay.
And that you were talking about who they are out in the world and whether or not they can bring their whole self into the museum. So, and I think that that is a discrete difference, because you're not saying who are they inside the museum. You are saying, who are you and can you bring yourself in here or not? And I think that that is a different supposition that is more holistic and more in line with what you want in the world than the other way around of thinking of who they are inside the museum. So I would say it's a yes, with the framing of it being the whole self and what pieces of the self are welcome inside the museum or not, and how might you want to change the culture of the museum to allow your whole self to be present. Or, given your answer to the first question, being that museums are not for everyone, might that be an intentional choice to not have all of your whole self actually present in a museum? Because as Midori has pointed out to me sometimes, especially as queer people, keeping pieces of our identities hidden actually allows us to be vulnerable and reveal other things in other ways. So just kind of thinking about that dynamic of the question between the museum, the response being the museum isn't for everyone, and yet it should be for whole selves. Where is that tension? How might young people find new answers to heal that divide?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That gave me a lot to think about.
So here is where we are going to try to think about moving this into a little bit of some action steps. So Crystal, this has been a very rich conversation. What are some thinkings that you have? You have this workshop in about a week. What are some steps that you need to take, and how might I be of service to you in doing some of that if needed?
Well, you've already have been in service to me, because I feel like I'm definitely want to like think about that question and open it up in ways that like I also talked about the second time, but also that you articulated. So I think like that was really helpful, because, I'm trying to, again, like ask questions of the interns that opens up space. So I think that was that. Also, if time permits, I want to try to create a different opening circle than just asking for the normal like pronouns, names, like where you're from, and to use that as a way, the opening circle also as a sort of tool to, again, to create space, to create spaciousness and expansiveness, and hopefully, again, a feeling that there's a space for them to be a bit more vulnerable with each other and with me. And because I'm always participating in these things, it also will allow me to show vulnerability with the youth interns. So one of the ways you could be in service to me is to helping me develop that particular piece.
So this is the awkward moment in the video where Jason goes off script and says, I know we had scheduled a video for next week, taking a look at our applied dreaming methodology, and also realizing that there are time and space constraints and we are in emergent process. I'm wondering if next week, instead of talking about our method, I think we hone in on opening and closing circles just in general, the idea of a circle as a tool, and that it is a tool used in openings and it is a tool used in closings. We've kind of introduced a querying circle here in this space. So it's a reinforcement of a model. And I'm wondering if our episode next week should focus on opening and closing circles, and we use this as an opportunity to also support your development of your workshop.
I think that's a possibility, but my workshop is on the 7th.
Yep.
Which could be a week from now.
It's a week from today. So we normally meet on Tuesdays, and we can do the general conversation about opening circles on Tuesday so that you can then go and practice them on the 7th. And then we could actually record our conversation after you do it.
Well, I would say yes, then let's do next week's video about opening and closing circles.
Right.
And the purpose of those things, you know?
And the reason we do them, and we have so much intention in them. It feels like it's a need, let's make it happen.
Yeah.
And that right there is the power of actually being able to have a supposition about what you think you're going to be doing, and also being able to be open and present enough in process to be able to listen to what is actually naturally emerging, and how can we mutually work towards the thing that's emergent and not just be rooted to the thing that we always say we're going to do, and then all of the stresses that come out. Because I know for me, I want to support you in an opening circle. Do you know what I'm saying? And thinking about the timing between now and next time we're recording is like, there's a lot of things we also have to do outside of this. So it feels really generous and generative to, let's just, this is awesome. I love this. Watch this happen live, everyone.
Right. I also want to say though, for people watching, this is also an example of letting yourself be changed in this, right, in the moment, right? And again, like, you know, that sort of generosity and curiosity that creates that space where you can literally be changed.
I'm noticing the time. We've had a lovely long video. I don't know that we need to go through the Dandelion Arts Finance program with Independent Arts and Media as another model. I think we did record for everyone on the other side of the screen. We did record our session yesterday with Dandelion. We have not asked for permission to share that, so we cannot actually share that yet, but the video has been recorded and we are in a process of documentation, and we will be doing a lot more announcements about our work with Dandelion because we're actually doing some strategic things coming up in the future. So if you're feeling good about it, Crystal, it feels like now is a natural time to kind of move towards our closing so that we're not like at an 1.5-hour video for everyone else on the other side of the screen. Does that feel okay to you?
That feels good, except for I wonder if we could just take a couple of minutes for to talk, just to explain what we're doing with Dandelion, you know, so again, so people kind of see what's possible.
Great. Thank you for that. I can share a little bit, and then we don't need to go through the whole process, but I will share for everyone. So Dandelion Arts Finance Program is a project of Jerica Senyak and Independent Arts and Media with some strategic input early on with Emerging Arts Professionals Network and Rhiannon Evans McFadgen, as well as a bunch of additional folks. And what's ended up emerging is they wanted to create an arts finance training program specifically for Black, Indigenous, disabled, queer, trans, and immigrant, low-income, and people of color artists, because that is often who Independent Arts and Media is fiscally sponsoring, and that is a lot of Jerica's clients as a financial consultant. One of the things that they did is they realized that they needed to bring on a praxis consultant at the end of May as they were trying to figure out what they were doing. And so they brought me on board because in terms of transparency and mapping relationships, I used to have a fiscally sponsored peer-based project with Independent Arts and Media, and I sat on their board specifically with a lens of how do we support their projects. So they brought me on board initially to design some additional praxis underneath it and the pedagogies underneath it. And one of the things that I did initially and almost immediately was say, well, who are we designing for? How are we engaging with those communities versus just creating something? How are we literally co-creating with them? And how do we use actual talking story, conversation, dialogue, and querying or inquiry to be able to start making something that actually is for that group of people and informed by that group of people that we say that we want to be designing for. The big issue is it was grant funded by the Zellerbach Foundation, and grants are due, right? Like grant reports are due. And so we careened towards a grant due date. And as we were careening towards a grant due date, I said, we can't really submit a full report. We actually can only submit a draft report. And we can only submit a draft report because we actually haven't done our due diligence back within the community engagement process of literally presenting back to the people that we talked with the things that they said. Like we actually need their input and feedback in the ways in which that we synthesized what it was that it was shared with us. And we needed to do that because the design team was mostly white folks. It was myself and Jerica and Lisa and Angela were mostly the folks sitting at the design tables, and we're all white. And we were designing this thing with a group or on behalf of a group of Black, Indigenous, disabled, queer, trans, immigrant, people of color artists. And so I said, let's halt this, let's submit a draft report. And then let's actually take a look at the peer-based pedagogies that are naturally emerging underneath this, whether that be our focus group or our one-on-ones that we were doing as part of our praxis and pedagogy development, as part of research. And why don't I bring in, because you and I have a peer-based approach through Queering Dreams, why don't I also bring in Queering Dreams into this next round in order to help us get from a draft report to a final report in a way that actually brings the communities that we say we want to work with along with us. And so that was our meeting this week, was sitting down and actually practicing dreaming for a second, allowing ourselves to give space, seed our dreams, and then give space for those dreams, and then query each other about our own suppositions about the work, and then actually calendar them into a series of next steps. Some of the next steps that we're taking are a thing like a document review. One of the things that we've noticed is that there's a lot of research right now, literally right now, between the time we put in the draft report and literally our meeting yesterday, I found 4 more reports about arts equity. Like, that's just how much right now is being written about arts equity, and we need to locate this body of work within a larger ecosystem of arts advocacy and arts policy. And I only know a fraction of it. And so we're going to do some sort of crowdsourced document review session to build a better bibliography. We're going to check our key pull quotes. Key pull quotes, again, this piece about not speaking for someone, but giving space for voice and then centering that voice. In the process of centering, we have to ensure that it's okay to include those things. Just because someone said it was okay in the first place doesn't mean that once we hit publish that they're okay with it being published. So we need to practice our process of consent and double checking with everyone about all of that stuff. And then we actually need to present our findings back to the community that participated in it so that we can actually get their feedback on some of the key findings that we have in it so that their feedback can be included in the final report. And so that is our process and what we're going to be doing with Dandelion Arts Finance Consulting over the next 4 months.
Thank you, Jason.
Yay! So everyone, let me go back to our screen share.
Mhm.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Crystal? I mean, you were in that meeting yesterday. It was your first meeting. Is there anything that you'd like to add before we jump into this last section?
I mean, really, I think you wrapped it up pretty good. I think you pretty much told that story and what needed to be told.
Great. We're in our wrap up. So where can they find us, and what's our comrade interest form, Crystal?
Our comrade interest form is a survey where we are again asking questions to see what interests people. That's why we're calling it a comrade interest form, because this is really about trying to see what people are interested in as far as workshops, as far as co-creating with us and or with others. We want to know like what people need in order to make it possible for them to participate. Things as simple as what time of day might you be available? And we're not just collecting that to collect it, we're actually, using that information to create this organization and what we are actually doing.
Next week, we're going to be going over opening and closing circles, modified into our agenda.
And in closing, we will ask everybody again on the other side of the screen to follow us and to like us. Again, we're on Facebook at Queering Dreams. We have a YouTube channel, again, at Queering Dreams, yeah. And then we're also on Instagram, once again, at Queering Dreams. And really, if you see our page and you like what we are doing, please like us, please follow us. It just also helps us get information out to people who are interested. And so if you know people who are interested, the Comrade Interest Form is on our Facebook page, is pinned to the top, so it's quite easy to find. And people can also contact us through all the other social media stuff directly as well.
I will link all of our personal stuff below this as well. So I'm not going to go through that, but we do have a closing question, which is brought to us today by, it is inspired by a post by Autumn, who is Burn It Up Baby on Twitter. That's at Burn It Up Baby on Twitter. B-A-B-E-E is the spelling of baby. And our closing question of the day is, what would be your dream community role? What would be your dream community role?
Do you have any thoughts about what that might look like for you, Jason?
Yeah, if I'm gonna just be wild in my wildest dreams of what would be possible, rather than limit it to the fact that I live in San Francisco. I've always really wanted to own a queer family feeling cafe, like really, truly something that anyone can come into, something that is not, I don't know, there's no charge, people can just be fed. There's always something going on or a conversation that could be had. If you're feeling lonely and just want to be alone, you could actually come and be alone together rather than be alone at home. And people would respect that particular kind of showing up in space. And that I would be able to flip between the kitchen and my computer and the espresso machine, making all the different things at different points and never being fully responsible for any one of those things because there's enough people collectively responsible for all of them.
Yeah, I think, this is a dream that I've had for a long time and that I've actually come close to. And that is like have community housing that is intergenerational, that does not depend at all on whether you have a lot of money or not, where people are valued for themselves and what they bring to the table, regardless of what that is, and where we practice conversation and communication and forgiveness.
This is a beautiful note to end on. Thank you for all of your dreams, Crystal.
Thank you for yours, Jason, and thanks for sharing them with me and everybody on the other side of the screen.
And thank you on the other side of the screen for your dreams too. Please, please, please keep dreaming.
And we appreciate you. And if you feel like it, on using our social media, please feel free to share your dreams with us and anybody else who might be seeing our social media. We would really appreciate that.
Bye all.
Bye.